It was a frigid winter morning, and I was sipping my third cup of coffee in the office when I received an urgent call. Detective Lee, there's a suspected gas poisoning incident at an apartment. 4 family members, 3 dead, 1 critically injured. I sighed. Such cases weren't uncommon in winter, but my gut told me this one was different. Upon arriving at the scene, the pungent odor hit me immediately. I put on my mask and carefully inspect each room. The 59.5 square meter apartment was filled with a faint haze. In the living room, the younger son lay on the floor, still breathing weakly. In a small bedroom, I found a burning charcoal stove in the closet, next to the parents covered with blankets, lying on the bed and floor, lifeless. The elder son was discovered in the master bedroom. He was face down on the floor, head towards the window, seemingly in agony. A half-full glass of liquor sat on a nearby table. Initial investigations suggested a typical case of carbon monoxide poisoning, but something felt off. 3 days later, the younger son regained consciousness. We hoped he could provide crucial information. I can't remember much, the younger son said, weakly, his eyes unfocused. I just remember drinking something, then everything went black. What did you drink? I pressed. A glass of liquor. I think my brother gave it to me. He hesitated. Everything after that is a blur. Despite the vagueness of his testimony, it pointed our investigation in a new direction. We soon found some critical clues. In the backseat of the elder son's car, we discovered a box containing charcoal and a lighter. Under the seat, there was a coal tongue, and next to the box, a charred black backpack. We also found that the elder son had sent messages to several close friends at 6:30 a.m. on the day of the incident, saying, "I'm leaving, take care." He had also sent a message to his girlfriend, "I love you, be happy." In the pocket of a green jacket, hanging in the master bedroom, we found lighter residue, and his right wrist bore traces of coal dust. My police instincts told me there was more to the story. Further investigation revealed that the elder son had been facing severe financial problems, not just due to a failed business. He was burdened with massive gambling debts, which his father had been paying off. Recently, however, his father had frequently clashed with him, and he threatened to stop helping him. More shockingly, we discovered that the elder son's girlfriend was actually his father's mistress. This startling fact was recorded in the elder son's diary, filled with resentment toward his father and obsession with the woman. "I can't stand her wavering between me and my father. This betrayal is more painful than death. I need to end it all," read the last page of the diary. Just as we were about to close the case, the forensics department sent a report. The carbon monoxide levels in the elder son's body were significantly lower than those of the other family members. More puzzlingly, his blood contained traces of sedatives. This discovery overturned our previous assumptions. If the elder son wasn't the last to die, who drugged him? I immediately reviewed the younger son's medical records. His symptoms during hospitalization were noticeably different from the other family members. His recovery was unusually quick, and he showed no typical post-carbon monoxide poisoning after effects. I recalled a detail from the crime scene. The younger son was found in the living room, not in his own room. I asked the younger son to come to the station the day after the funeral. When I saw his spotless car, I knew I was on the right track. "Your car is very clean," I remarked, "especially the back seat." His expression changed momentarily, but he quickly regained his composure. "Yes, I like to keep it tidy," he said calmly. I decided to get to the point. "We found some interesting things at the scene," I said. "You were found in the living room, not in your room. Can you explain that?" The younger son hesitated slightly, then said, I remember smelling something strange and went to check, but I passed out in the living room." I pressed on. "We found sedatives in your brother's blood. Do you know anything about that?" His hands began to tremble slightly. I don't know," he stammered. I produced a report. "Interestingly, we found some shredded paper in your home's trash can. Our technicians pieced it together and found it was a receipt for purchasing sedatives. The date was the day before the incident, and the signature looks a lot like yours. The younger son's breathing became rapid. I didn't say anything further, just watched him quietly. Before long, he broke down. Tears streamed down his face as he said emotionally, "You don't understand. No one understands. Some wounds are worse than death." He didn't directly confess, but his words gave us enough information to piece together the truth. His father was a retired military man who had emotionally abused the younger son for years, belittling him, saying he would never measure up to be his brother. The mother knew, but chose to remain silent. The younger son felt betrayed by his entire family. "I tried to tell my brother," the younger son sobbed, "but he didn't believe me. He said I was lying, trying to cause trouble." On his 18th birthday, the younger son mustered the courage to rebel against his father's control. He secretly applied to a university far from home and announced it on his birthday. His father was furious. To him, this was a challenge to his authority, a betrayal of family tradition. Their family had lived and worked in this city for generations. The younger son said he yelled that I didn't deserve our family name and threatened to kick me out. He choked. At that moment, I decided to make them pay. I wanted them to feel my pain, to know what it felt like to be betrayed by those closest to you. The case was closed, but the lingering questions remained. What drives a young person to such extremes? A psychological analyst told me, this is a classic case of extreme behavior resulting from long-term trauma. Victims sometimes internalize their pain, leading to destructive outcomes. Perhaps some wounds are indeed worse than death, but we must continue to uncover these hidden pains because only then can we truly prevent such tragedies from happening.
As a paramedic, the first thing they train you for is to be ready for anything. My day started with my pager going off around 3:30 in the morning, and me trying to force myself to wake up in time to catch a ride with my partner James. James has been an EMT for only a few short years, but his clear leadership skills and sensibility have given him quite a few perks, one of which includes that he can take one of the hospital's reserve ambulances home with him for situations like the one we were dealing with that night. Dispatch said that they got a call a few minutes ago up near Twin Falls. Might be drug-related, James said as he put the pedal to the metal. I busted myself getting supplies ready for whatever we might encounter, listening to chatter over the radio about what 911 had reported. Call came from one of the homeless shelters downtown. A woman was reported to be experiencing some kind of seizure and foaming at the mouth, the radio chirped. My first thought went to some lowlife trying to slip her a drug. That happened all too often in these parts. But when we arrived at the shelter, my reaction changed to one of confusion. The building itself looked abandoned, and without power to any of the levels, my first question was how had someone made a phone call from here? Maybe this was a prank, I asked. Then James spotted a figure near one of the windows, the woman that dispatch had reported. She was walking strangely toward us and limping slowly. I jumped out of the ambulance and ran straight toward her to help her. "Hey, sweetie, we're here to help you, okay?" I told her. The woman made no attempt to respond. I could see little bits of foam still drooling out of her mouth. The seizure was still taking hold of her body, and yet somehow she was able to walk upright. I tugged at the doors to the ambulance and got her on a stretcher. As soon as the straps touched her skin, though, she started to scream in pain. "What's going on?" James asked. "She might have some nerve damage. Move out right away," I ordered him. The woman began thrashing, screaming louder as she struggled to break the straps. The ambulance lurched forward, and I heard the sirens blare. I reached for a sedative to calm her down. As I prepped the needle, the woman started speaking, but the words were just jumbled and made no sense. She kept saying the same nonsense over and over. Then she bit down on her tongue, and blood seeped out of her mouth. I hurried to get the sedative in her arm. She grabbed at my arm with a strength I knew could not be her own. Her eyes that had once been pleading now showed menace. We were on the interstate. I heard traffic buzzing past us at 80 miles an hour, and the strange woman looked like she might attack me. Then she bit me. I jumped back, and she screamed and became feral. scratching and clawing at me. I started frantically pushing things out to try and block her, but this woman had abnormal strength. "What's going on back there?" he asked. I couldn't even explain it. Pull over, we have a situation back here," I yelled. The woman shook her head and hit me hard against the face, trying to rip at my face. James shouted, "What the hell is happening? We're 10 minutes out." I fumbled to find a sedative and jabbed it in her neck to calm her down. I saw her eyes dilate, and for a moment, I thought the medicine was gonna work. Then finally, she collapsed to the floor of the ambulance. When we got to St. Luke's, I told the ER staff to make sure that she was strapped down while we tried to get the drugs out of her system. Honestly, I thought that once she was secure, things would settle down, but the worst was yet to come. I've heard of drug addicts doing crazy things whenever they are detoxing. Seeing it for myself was beyond words. I was taking a coffee break and rubbing the wound where the woman had bit me when I heard a shriek from the ER. I knew it was likely the addict, and I dropped what I was doing to go help. The woman had somehow managed to slip out of her restraints and was now holding the attending nurse with a scalpel at her neck. It was clear from the blood that she had no issue with hurting someone. Her eyes were wild, and it looked like she could either go into a frenzy or suddenly collapse again. "You need to calm down. No one here is going to hurt you," I told her as I gently entered the room. I took a few steps, and she pushed the nurse away and leapt onto me. Scratching at my face and screaming like a banshee, she pushed her way out of the room. I scrambled to get on my feet to see where she went. Truth was, she was acting more like a wild animal, pushing things out of her way and attacking anyone that tried to stop her. One of the nurses got on the phone to call security, while the woman lifted up a rolling chair and used it to smash open a medical cabinet. Glass and vials spilled everywhere as people around her shrieked and got out of the way. Carefully, I tried to figure out a way to corner her as I watched her frantically searching the cabinet for her next drug fix. I knew that she was desperate and not thinking clearly, and that frightened me even more. She could do anything to get what she wanted, I realized as her eyes focused on me and she picked up the nearby broken glass and started flinging it toward me. I didn't want to hurt her, but self-defense kicked in and I used another chair to block the glass. I slipped down to the floor and tried to think. It was going to end very badly if she wasn't subdued. Just at that moment, security rushed in and started to pull out their weapons. The woman immediately ran toward the open patient rooms and my heart sank. She started to use other patients as human shields when the officers opened fire. Everything was happening so fast, no one had the proper time to actually react to her doing it. Then I saw James enter from the opposite end of the ER, unaware of anything that was happening. The woman seemed to recognize him and jumped on him as the officers rushed to grab her. She bit James hard in his face and yanked out an eye, blood spilling out as the officers finally shot her in the back. Her body collapsed on top of his as my friend kept screaming. James was rushed to emergency surgery, but he lost his eyesight on his left side. We both agreed to stop doing ambulance runs after that night. In this tragic story, the woman grew up in a household filled with violence and neglect. Her parents were dissatisfied with her presence, possibly due to financial strain or other family issues. They took out their frustrations and anger on her. She was often subjected to physical abuse, being beaten and locked in her room. When she finally decided to escape this painful environment, she was only in her teens. She encountered seemingly friendly strangers at a temporary shelter who offered her food and warm clothing. However, these individuals secretly spiked her drink, causing her to lose consciousness. When she awoke, she found herself penniless. These experiences inflicted severe psychological and physical trauma on her, which ultimately erupted in her final moments.
I get paid to catfish people on Omegle. I'm not gonna just sit here and lie about the fact that I think my job is meaningful. It's not. Omegle is a website that pairs random visitors through video and text chat, and it has spiked in popularity over the past 4 months. So, of course, con artists are gonna roll in and take advantage. Visitors can submit keywords to filter for people with shared interests, all of which I use to my advantage to find my next big fish to fry. Let me reiterate that I'm not an undercover officer nailing bad guys, just a regular Joe tricking gullible guys to send money to anonymous checking accounts that can't be traced. The company I work for gives me a new identity every week, a new model I use as a profile picture, and even write up a fancy description that is meant to entice unsuspecting clientele. All I do is pretend to be someone I'm not. I string them along with emotionally charged messages or innuendo, sometimes even send a few extra pics that are photoshopped for emphasis, whatever floats the boat. And once they are finally in too deep, I snag their credit card information and voila. Suddenly, the sexy, sultry woman they were talking to disappears entirely. Another sucker born. This works both ways too, not just on men, but I will admit they are usually the ones who get lured in the most. I suppose that I never considered it dangerous or the harm I might be doing to the families out there. After all, if they were loyal to their mates, they wouldn't be searching in the first place, right? And I never forced anyone to do anything. It was simply the art of persuasion. That's what I told myself anyway. But after what happened last week, I'm seriously considering getting a different line of work. "You're the one for me, Regina," the user typed out, and then sent a picture of an engagement ring to my DMs. The guy was a high-paying user. The bosses had designed a foolproof diva for him, named Regina, that checked off all the boxes he was looking for. He was going to be a big fish that fried when we were done with him. He had come so far into the chat, taking the extra step to provide legit certifying info that told me where he was located and stuff like that. He wanted to commit to a person, me, that he had never seen before. Naturally, I declined the ring, but instead asked for credit card information, like I have always been instructed. "Maybe we could meet up and have a real fling," I suggested. "You don't understand. You are my whole life. I devote everything to you. I worship you." It didn't make sense to me for anyone to have this sort of obsession over someone that they had never met before. But this guy was serious and apparently wanted more, and didn't want to hear me say no. That was definitely an unorthodox response, but I didn't let it deter me to be persistent and get what I needed. "Honey, I would love to spend more time with you, but you know that I can't unless I can get out of the situation I'm in," I cooed him. "No, I'm going to be with you. I don't care if we have never met, you are the one for me. I can prove it," he responded. Then a snapshot appeared on screen and I froze. It looked like an exact replica of the model I was pretending to be. This dude had literally carved out a wooden sculpture in my image. "That's so sweet," I typed back. Honestly, at this point, I was just trying to find a way out of the chat. To be honest, this creeped the hell out of me. I have just dealt with stalkers before, but this was next level. So I messaged the company and asked what I should do while I told him on. "Keep him strung along, don't give up. That shrine he built shows he is hooked," they said. My would-be suitor was growing impatient. "Regina, I'm beginning to think that you don't appreciate the things I do for you," he said sourly. "This sculpture isn't just a work of art, it's connection between us. I can feel everything you feel," he said as he touched the wooden idol, and I felt the hair on my arm stand up. Was he serious? I panicked and decided to disconnect, unconcerned with the money. My bosses were not too happy with that response. I'm supposed to stick the landing, so to speak. So they gave me some time off to rethink my career, and I just tried to take it easy and not stress. I kept telling myself I would never see that weirdo again, convincing myself it was all just going to go away. It was the only way that I could go back to work the following Monday. Things went back to normal for a while. I kept scamming would-be Romeos left and right, and getting back into the swing of things, ignoring that one creep and just doing my job. I was sure I would never experience something that nightmarish again, but I was wrong. About a month later, I entered the chat with my usual greeting, and the user immediately sent the query, "Is this Regina?" For a brief moment, I considered lying. After all, Omegle doesn't provide any information to users unless you willingly give it. Regina was still the persona that I was taking on, but there was no way this random stranger would know that, unless... Now I did panic, and I considered disconnecting again. It had to be the same person. I've heard a bizarre coincidence where people occasionally bumped into each other again on the chat, but I thought it would never happen to me. I was paralyzed as to what to do, but then the stranger made the decision for me. "If this is the person who claimed to be Regina, you need to respond. It's a matter of life and death, they said. Then a pop-up came on my screen and told me they wanted to share their webcam feed with me. Something in that short text told me this was serious and more than just a creep taking things too far. Something was very wrong. I clicked on it and caught myself trying not to gasp in shock. The man was holding a woman hostage, tied on a stool with her eyes taped open and her mouth gagged. She looked tired and bruised, clearly having fought my stalker tooth and nail. And worst of all, they looked exactly like my fake profile, like the real Regina would look. My heart sank. The stalker held the knife closer to their jugular and made his demands. It took me a while, but I found you. I don't know why you kept yourself hidden from me, but now we can be together once this imposter is out of the way, they said. I looked at the woman, frightened and frantic, and realized that could have easily been me, but they were convinced that I was Regina. I switched on my camera instinctively, panicking as I tried to explain. You don't understand. This wasn't supposed to be real. It's just a scam. Regina wasn't supposed to be a real person. No one was supposed to get hurt, I told them. They looked confused, angry, as if what I said simply had to be a lie. All we do is scam users online for credit card info, nothing else. Please, just let her go, I explained. I realized, even when I was saying it, that I wasn't being completely fair. We did hurt people. We were the cause of this woman's suffering. If you don't want me, then what is the point of love? The user said across my screen. Then, before I could bargain with him any further, he cut the woman's throat. I screamed as she bled out, choking on her own spit and blood, as he started to stab her over and over again. Then, he turned to look me in the eye, his face full of rage and accusation. I knew this was my fault, but he wanted to make sure I saw his final act of hatred for what I represented as he cut his own throat next. He fell on top of Regina, the two victims gasping for breath on camera as I sat there, motionless. I discovered the feed and called the authorities, but of course it was too late. I didn't even know where this stranger was located. At least you didn't get hurt, my boss said, but the scars of what I saw on screen will haunt me forever.
Everybody liked to whisper about the hermit on the 4th floor, Mr. Kobayashi. Hikikomori is the Japanese word for a social recluse, and it was also the word that the isolated gentleman had scrawled on his front door in white chalk. Now, don't tut, I'm no snooper. I was his next door neighbour. I had to walk past Kobayashi's flat every day. There was a deep well in my gut, and it churned whenever I passed flat 11. The awful nature of that man's existence reminded me of my unwell mother. She took her life when I was only a boy. Depression had cast a pall over our household, and in those final months, we had been unable to convince her to leave her room, or even her bed. The more my father pushed, the worse she became, until, eventually... Well, anyway, I lived in that apartment building for 5 years, without seeing the mysterious man. No tenant had ever seen him, in fact. We only knew about his existence from the landlady, Mrs. Grisham. I haven't seen him in the flesh since he moved here, she told us. And when was that? Tyson asked. 2012, Mrs. Grisham replied. He was a frail fellow, but he seemed perfectly ordinary. I've always tried to respect his privacy. He sends me photographs of the flat, so I've never intruded his space to do an inspection. After all, it's an illness. I feel deeply sorry for the man. An obvious question sprang to mind. How do you know he hasn't died? I asked, much to Tyson's amusement. Mrs. Grisham smiled, rolling her eyes. I know landlords and landladies are meant to be wicked, Sean, but I do contact my tenants. Mr. Kobayashi and I speak on the phone. The main thing is that he pays his rent on time, a neat brown envelope at the end of the month, and I won't tell you where he leaves it, you little thieves. Ah, rent. That's what it's really about, Tyson teased, and Mrs. Grisham scowled. What about food? I asked. He has to eat. As far as I'm aware, he has always used the fire escape to accept deliveries, Mrs. Grisham said. They never see him, of course. They drop parcels on the floor. It's all fine in my books, mind. I'm just glad the man has found a way to live his life. Does he have a large inheritance? I asked. I'm trying to figure out how he pays the bills. OnlyFans? Tyson smirked. Mrs. Grisham sighed. I think that's enough gossip for one day. It's been lovely talking to you delightful boys, as always. Sean, would you mind telling Freya that her rent is late again? We did as our landlady asked, and strolled down the corridor to my girlfriend's flat. Neither of us glanced at Mr. Kobayashi's door. In spite of our jokes, I think we both feared that apartment. The scrawled word, Hikikomori, felt so unhinged in design. It was a warning more than anything. I'd always believed that. At night, through the wall, I would hear haunting noises from Kobayashi's flat. Laboured breathing, gurgling, and one terrible time, a primal wail that filled my body with a paralysing weight. Earth to Sean, Tyson chuckled. You mind waiting for me at your girl's place? Or is it your place now? I rolled my eyes. Not yet, Tyson. He laughed. I still don't see why you two still live in separate flats. Get a room already. Anyway, I've got to go check on the baby. I'll see you there. I often marvelled at the fact that Tyson, the most immature man I knew, had a wife and a child, Rebecca and Jack. Wonders never ceased on the 4th floor. That evening, Tyson, Rebecca, Freya and I ate dinner around my girlfriend's cramped dining table. Little baby Jack sat and squealed excitably in his big chair. Has Sean told you about the latest development with Mr. Kobayashi? Tyson asked, bouncing Jack on his lap. Freya groaned, rolling her eyes. Have you two been pestering Mrs. Grisham again? We finally got somewhere, I grinned. Mr. Kobayashi does, in fact, interact with the world. He's not dead. Great, Rebecca said, rolling her eyes. Mystery solved. Will you two drop it now? Red, Jack cried, gleefully pointing at the window. I looked at the fire escape, noticing a delivery woman in a red jacket. Oh, look, I said, chuckling. That must be one of Kobayashi's visitors. Now you mentioned it. I have noticed that woman before, Freya said. Who dares me to go to Kobayashi's window? Tyson snorted, passing the baby to his wife and drunkenly clambering to his feet. Nobody, Rebecca said. I think that's enough wine for one night. Let's head back to the flat and put Jack to bed. Tyson grumpily agreed, and the pair grabbed their things before heading for the door. Whilst Freya chatted with Rebecca, Tyson leaned over to me. His breath reeked of cheap liquor, and I scrunched my face into a disapproving grimace. Take a picture of Mr. Kobayashi's flat from the fire escape, he slurred. I dare you. 500 quid. I rolled my eyes. Go home, you mess. Too little? Okay. 600,000. No, wait. 600 quid, Tyson whispered, giggling as he opened PayPal on his phone. Look, it's there. I'm not messing around. Send me a picture. Wait, no. Film a video, then I'll transfer £700. I was tipsy, but nowhere near as intoxicated as Tyson. I definitely had enough control of my mental faculties to decline his moronic dare, but I accepted. 600 quid for a photograph? I'd have been an idiot to turn that down, knowing what I knew then. Knowing what I know now, of course. No amount of money in the world could incentivize me to climb up that fire escape. I wished Freya a good night, making up an excuse about having some work to do. It was a half-truth, I suppose. So, I walked through my darkened flat, beelining for the window that led onto the fire escape. I only had to clamber outside, walk 10 feet, and take a photograph. I left my window ajar and gently plopped onto the metal walkway attached to our apartment building. After padding softly along the walkway, I crouched outside flat 11 and eyed Mr. Kobayashi's window. My phone was in my shaky hand, and my finger was hovering over the shutter button. I just hoped my friend wouldn't backtrack on the deal when he sobered up. I turned on the flash, as I suspected that it would be too dark to distinguish anything in the reclusive man's flat. But when I peeked over the windowsill to look into the man's darkened home, casting my phone light through the grimy glass pane, I was met with an utterly terrible sight. I have no idea what photos Mr. Kobayashi sent to Mrs. Grisham for her flat inspections, but I'd imagine he didn't reveal what I saw that night. In the lion's lightless den, bloody body parts hung from the wall, a macabre collection of fleshy trophies, but the true terror lay in the centre of the room. Mr. Kobayashi was on his haunches, feasting on a corpse. Beside him, a red jacket was draped over a chair. It was the delivery lady. I clasped my mouth, muffling a scream that attempted to slither through my lips. The elderly Japanese man didn't look frail to me. He had a slim build, but he effortlessly tore into his victim. He lifted a chunk of flesh to his greedy, quivering lips. And then, on the verge of consuming his prepared meal, Mr. Kobayashi paused. He noticed the glow of the phone light that was illuminating his wicked work. When he looked towards the window, I was petrified by his face. Kobayashi's lips were coated in blood, and his jaw hung loosely. Then he unloaded an awful sound, a wailing shriek. Tumbling backwards, I dropped my phone between the metal bars of the fire escape flooring, and I watched it plummet to the deserted alley below. Too afraid to stand, I crawled towards my window. I was haunted by the silence of Kobayashi's flat, but I longed for it when I heard the sinister sound of glass panes sliding apart behind me. The hikikomori's fingers crept through his open window, and I screamed, scrambling over the ledge into my flat. I hurriedly shut my own window and backed through my empty, blackened apartment. The man lumbered into my line of sight. With nothing but a thin sheet of glass between us, he surveyed me from the fire escape, surveying me with horrible eyes. And I could only watch in horror as he began to pound ferociously on the window. Cracks started to form. After frantically fumbling with the handle behind my back, too afraid to take my eyes off the abomination, I felt the front door open, and I finally made it into the corridor. Locking my flat behind me, I expected to hear smashing glass, but there was only dreadful silence. I pounded on Freya's door, and she let me inside. One look at the ghastly expression on my face was sufficient for her to realise that this was no practical joke. She immediately dialed 999. It wasn't the first time they'd been called. Cases of missing women had been tied to the old man before, but no evidence had ever been found. And on that night, when the police broke into flat 11, Mr. Kobayashi had already fled. Though in truth, Mr. Kobayashi had been gone for a long time, hadn't he? After all, whatever lived in that darkened hole, it was barely a man.